It's funny, but in Cuba, the timbal players don't take solos, only conga players and the bongacero, Tito Puente noted. When the drums are dreaming, Josephine Powell, 2007. Brief history of the timbales. The timbales, a Cuban instrument, developed almost parallel to the development of the Cuban danzón. The danzón can be traced to the introduction of the French contradanza in Haiti during the 18th century. The timbales criollos or Creole timpani, a smaller version of the European timpani, was used to accompany the contradanzas played by an orquesta típica which included woodwind and brass instruments such as the clarinet, cornet, trombone, bassoon and tuba. A string section was also employed consisting of violins and contrabass. The percussion consisted of the timpani and a gyro. Due to a slave rebellion in Haiti in 1791, many Haitians immigrated to the eastern province of Cuba called Orient, bringing with them the contradanza. In Cuba the contradanza evolved into the danza habanera or habanera, and finally the danzón. All of these forms made use of the Creole timpani. When the danzón appeared in the early 1900s, a new kind of orchestra appeared called Charanga francesa, French orchestra. This new combination of instruments consisted of a wooden flute, piano, contrabass, violins, gyro and the pailitas or timbales criollos.
Very exciting for listeners and for performers, but it just wasn't enough. The dancers demanded something different. This music evolved into the danza and then into the danzón. Danzones exhibited stronger African influences, contained the sequillo rhythm, and instead of being performed on piano, danzones were performed by small chamber groups or orchestras called orquesta típicas. They were mostly mulatto musicians who performed this music, and they took this European-style composition, jazzed it up, added syncopation, and made it their own. The danzón was born.
Además de lo que tú has dicho y lo que han dicho los maestros, también tiene una base rítmica.
Seguro.
Con la que el bailador es quien se siente muy identificado. Esto hace que se mueva al compás de la música tan linda, tan clásica, diríamos nosotros, claro, o sinfónica en ocasiones. Ahora bien, tiene distintas partes. Una parte donde el bailador simplemente está disfrutando con su compañera muy cerca de él, como si fuera una canción o un bolero. En otro momento del danzón no se baila, es el paseo. Claro. En este momento se sueltan los dos, ella se supone que se echa fresco o que conversan un poco y demás, hasta que entra el tema nuevamente y es cuando vuelve a retomar a la pareja y siguen moviéndose ya un poco más separados, ¿no? Hasta que llegue el estribillo, el montuno, que es donde ya no se pueden soltar mucho porque en esa época que se bailó inicialmente el danzón, las parejas no se soltaban.
It was during this era of the early danzón that the European timpani went through some changes in order to adapt to the popular music. The timbales came into being when the danzón became popular and the appeal of the dance and rhythm penetrated into the white society. It was impossible to take the very heavy and cumbersome European timpani to these dances. A battery of African drums could not be taken either because these instruments were unacceptable in that environment. A smaller timpani was thus made by taking metal cylinders and mounting skins on them with tension keys. They were then supported on a metal stand at knee level. These factors made the drums more portable and economical. The new instrument was played sitting down with the large drum called hembra, which means female, to the left and the small drum, macho, which means male, to the right. The playing of the timbales did not yet make use of a cowbell. The timbales were played, just as the Creole timpani, using a direct transference of the hand drumming technique called baquillo. In effect, the transculturation of the European timpani to the smaller timbales was due to economical and ethnic factors. As stated by Fernando Ortiz, los timbales criollos parecen hijos de los timbales blanco y no hubo con ellos raperos de raza. The Creole timbales seem to be a descendant of the European timpani, and with them, racial differences were not noted. Translation.
Entonces lo pueden hacer. Está tocando nada más lo que él siente, lo que él quiere. Sí, porque no se quieren apegar a esto. Está de lo... Les voy a presumir, todos los timbaleros que andan con los danzoneros han sido mis alumnos. El Jere, Berna, Landrín, que andaba con la Cuban. Bueno, no sé si conozcan a Juanito, que es de San Lorenzo, Juan Medina. Él sí lo conocen, San Juan Medina. No, hombre, se ponía así enfrente de Acerina y un día me regaló un paquete de compas y se me ocurrió regalar copias. Me dejó, no me habló durante 10 años. Pero cuando tuvo necesidad de entrar con la orquesta de Yucatán, me dice, enséñame, sí, te enseño. Y fue a la casa y le digo, nada más que vas a aprender lo que sabes, nada más. Porque el buen timbalero llega a una danzonera y le pone su papel y lo que le ponga, ¿sí? Sabe leer, ¿sí? No hay y los que nada más aprenden de oído, pues no van a tocar lo que conocen, ¿sí? Pero esa es la idea.
Timbales and timbalitos. The word timbales literally means timpani in French, and the Creole timbales are an adaptation of the European timpani, or kettle drums. The transformation of the timpani consisted of eliminating the kettle or bowl-like shape, leaving two round drum shells with tunable heads which were mounted on a metal tripod. This evolution was completed around the turn of the century, where the new Creole timbales were used in ensembles known as charangas, which interpreted the Cuban danzón. The timbales are played with sticks, as opposed to mallets used with the timpani, and have since been added onto with several accessory items such as cowbells, woodblocks and cymbals. A smaller version of the timbales are the timbalitos, or pailas, sometimes added to the regular drums, for a set of 4. Charanga francesa. In the early 20th century, a smaller instrumentation called the charanga francesa, later simply called the charanga, emerged, consisting of one wood flute, replacing both woodwinds and brass, 2 violins, piano, contrabass, the timbales, and the gyro. In the 1940s, the tumbadora, or conga drum, was added, and sometimes a cello. Originally, the strings used in the early charanga orchestras were played acoustically, with no amplification. Microphones were then used directly over the sound holes of the body. Since the advent of electronic pickups and effects, the sound of electric violin may also be heard in the charanga orchestra.
Monta la tabalanera. Hi everybody, Bobby Sanabria here for this edition of Percussion Discussion. I guess you know what this instrument is. The timbales. Now you've probably seen Maestro Tito Puente, the king of the timbales, play this instrument. Actually, Maestro Puente revolutionized the way this instrument is played. But let me give you a little bit of the history, the basics of the instrument, how to play it, especially in this context, what we call the danzón, the first style that you must learn to be able to be a proficient timbalero if you're a guy, or timbalera if you're a girl. First of all, let's talk about the instrument itself. Well, what was it invented for? It was invented for a style of Cuban music known as danzón, meaning grand or great dance. And that style of music was developed by a great Cuban musician by the name of Miguel Failde, who came from Matanzas, Cuba, the city across the bay from La Habana. Miguel was what we call a mulatto. He was part of African heritage and part of European heritage. And he studied many different instruments. He was proficient on brass instruments, also on the piano and on the violin. So what he did was, in 1877, he fused the French contradance, this European dance tradition that actually were country dances by the farmers that were adapted by the bourgeoisie in France, Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia, other places, the high courts, and they adapted it to their own means. That music was brought to Haiti during the colonial period. It got to Cuba, it got to Puerto Rico, it got to New Orleans, Louisiana. And in Cuba, it inspired Miguel Failde to create what he called the grand dance, or danzón. Now, the first band that he formed in 1879 to play his first danzón, which he composed, Las Alturas de Simpson, in 1877. Wow, it took him 2 years to form a band to finally perform his first piece. It was made up of brass instruments, clarinet, some strings, concert tuba known as a bombardino or euphonium, piano, bass, and believe it or not, European style kettle drums, the timpani, yeah, and it was a big hit. The press lauded this as the new national music of Cuba. And you're probably wondering, well, why that? Because obviously the song tradition existed, but people knew that in Eastern Cuba, the song, the root of what we call salsa, that tradition didn't come until the late 19th century to La Habana. And that tradition, the song, and all the subgenres in it, like the guajira, the guaracha, etc., well, they were all done in an impromptu, improvisational kind of way. Nobody really wrote them down. They were folk song traditions. But now with the danzón, since Miguel Failde was classically trained, he wrote everything down, very meticulous in the arranging, etc., etc. It became a big hit, and he got to travel for the next 20 years from 1879 onward to Veracruz, Mexico. He was invited to perform there, and there the music took hold in its original form, in what the style of band that became known as a danzonera, these large ensembles that would play outdoors in the town square. Believe it or not, that music, the danzón, as it was played by these danzoneras, is still played that way in Veracruz, Mexico. It's like taking a time machine back into the 19th century. Failde, as I said before, went there, concertized there for the next 20 years. And you can go to Veracruz and you can hear actual danzoneras at a place called Salón Mexico that actually play the danzón in that original style. It's a beautiful dance, it's a box step, etc., etc. And there are many elements to it. Then finally, in 1899, a pianist by the name of Antonio Maria Romeo decides to bring the danzón, adapt it and scale it down in terms of instrumentation into a small group that he called a charanga francesa, or a charanga, C-H-A-R-A-N-G-A. And to do that, he eliminates the brass. He replaces that with a wooden Baroque flute known as a tercerola. It's a 5-key French-style flute from the Baroque period. Very high piercing, etc. Uses violins, uses the acoustic bass, as I said before, and he uses the piano, but he replaces the timpani, the European timpani, with what became known as the timbales, which is the French word for the kettle drums or the timpanis. So you got to be careful when you go to Europe, and if you see a symphony orchestra and you look at the score and it says timbales, a French composer wrote it, they're not talking about the Cuban timbales, they're talking about the European kettle drums. But that inspired the use of this, the timbales. Now, before the timbales came a smaller set based on the European kettle drums, the European timpani, known as timbal criollo. It's like a smaller version of the European timpani. But what's interesting about it is they were played in an Africanized way, like I was doing before. And you do on the instrument, whether you're playing the timbal criollo, the timpani, or the timbales in the Cuban form, what we call baqueteo, B-A-Q-U-E-T-E-O. Now, this is highly arranged music. Another instrument that's used in the danzón, whether it's played by a danzonera or the charanga, is this, the guiro. Now, how did this danzón, the way they played it back in the 19th century, sound in the context of a danzonera orchestra, which is a combination of strings and brass, also saxophones, clarinet, etc. And the use of the way they used to play the European timpani, but not with a mallet like this, but with sticks like this, with no beads or heads on them, okay? And even fatter. Well, you're in for a treat. Let's look at the great Acerina, another transplanted Cuban who moved to Mexico and formed his own danzonera orchestra, Acerina y su danzonera. And let's watch him play with his orchestra in the early style of the way the danzón was played. Now, pay attention to the person that plays this instrument, the guiro. He is in sync totally with what Acerina is playing, and you'll hear somebody playing the clave, the beat that you first heard me play before, with my foot. Let's look at Acerina y su danzonera, playing the danzón the way it was originally played on the timpani. Now, remember, when you watch Acerina, he's left-handed. So everything that I did for you before is reversed. But check out also how he plays the side of the shell of the timbales, which is known as cáscara, C-A-S-C-A-R-A. It's also known as paila, P-A-I-L-A, and it's also the Spanish word for this instrument. So if you, I'm a young musician and somebody in a salsa orchestra gives you an arrangement, the timbale part, and it says on the top paila, it basically means the timbales, but it also means you're going to be playing the side of the shell. If it's cáscara, it means you're going to be playing the side of the shell. The instrument of itself, wasn't that great? It was like going back in time. Now, as I said before, the Cuban timbales replacing the timbal criollo and the timpani, well, they started appearing around 1899, 1900, with a gentleman by the name of Antonio Maria Romeo, a great pianist who develops the first charanga orchestra. What is a charanga? Again, it is flute, strings, bass, piano, guiro, and timbales. Antonio Maria Romeo developed this and championed the use of this smaller version of the timbal criollo or the European timpani, the timbales. With sticks like this, with no beads or heads on them, okay, and even fatter, well, you're in for a treat. Let's look at the great Acerina, another transplanted Cuban who moved to Mexico and formed his own danzonera orchestra, Acerina y su danzonera, and let's watch him play with his orchestra in the early style of the way the danzón was played. Now pay attention to the person that plays this instrument, the guido. He is in sync totally with what Acerina is playing, and you'll hear somebody playing the clave, the beat that you first heard me play before, with my foot. Let's look at Acerina y su danzonera, playing the danzón the way it was originally played on the timpani. Now remember, when you watch Acerina, he's left-handed. So everything that I did for you before, it's reversed. But check out also how he plays the side of the shell of the timbales, which is known as cáscara, C-A-S-C-A-R-A. It's also known as paila, P-A-I-L-A, and it's also the Spanish word for this instrument. So if you, I'm a young musician and somebody in a salsa orchestra gives you an arrangement, the timbale partner says on the top, paila, it basically means the timbales, but it also means you're going to be playing the side of the shell. If it's a cáscara, it means you're going to be playing the side of the shell. The instrument of itself, in and of itself, well, the two drums, you'll notice that this small drum is in front of me and the large drum is to the left. The small drum is called macho, M-A-C-H-O, which means male. Female, hembra, H-E-M-B-R-A, is the large timbale, okay? The male talks a lot. But the female commands from African tradition. Okay, so let's look at Acerina, and the reason I pointed out to you that the small drum is in front, the large one to the left, because if you've studied classical percussion, any of you who have know that the French style of timpani playing, the small drum is to the front of the player, and all the larger drums are to the left. In the German style, it's the opposite. The large drum is here, and the smaller drums are to the left. So, hence, the French word for kettle drums, timbales, and the way the drums are set up in the French style of timpani playing, that is why we set up the drums the way they are. All right, once again, here's Acerina. of a European instrument. By that I mean that in terms of the European symphony, okay, you would see somebody playing like this. Okay? But when we play in the danzón, we are playing this instrument like if it was a hand drum. Let me give you an example. This is the basic pattern to accompany the danzón in the direction 2-3 of the clave. 2-3 means this: 2 notes first of the clave, then followed by 3 notes. Again, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So listen for the clave again. In fact, you could clap along, or play, if you have some clave sticks, you could play along. Now I'm going to do the most basic interpretation of the paqueteo for the danzón. What is the paqueteo? The mellowing out of the pattern that's used to accompany the danzón. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you notice I'm muffling the drum with my left hand. I have the stick underneath my palm and I'm holding it with my thumb. I put that on top of the drum. The stick goes up like this so it doesn't touch the drum. Then I play the rhythm with the stick in my right hand. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people like to play right in the center of the drum, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You get a slightly higher pitch. Some people like to play a little bit farther back. But every time I hit the open sound, when I lift my hand up, I'm always in the middle of the drum. And some people like me play in between. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm muffling with my left hand. I'm going to do it a little bit faster is because in the 1920s, in the mid-1920s, a gentleman by the name of Aniceto Diaz, another great Cuban composer, started writing danzons with lyrics to them, okay? And at a faster tempo, this became known as the danzonete, okay? So up until then, the danzones were all instrumental, all completely written out, right? And no improvisation was happening at all right? And every once in a while, Antonio Maria Romeo, the pianist, during his compositions, he would do what we call a little filigree on the piano. He was the pianist, Very important person to know. He's responsible for over 2,000 compositions. And he's part of the history of la música cubana. Okay? But no improvisation. Occasionally, the timbalero, or timbalera if it's a female, would do repiques, little fills, that we'll get into later on. But let me give you an example of a tempo for Aniceto Diaz's original composition, Danzonete, and I'll sing a little bit of it. It's in 2/3 clave. I'm going to do the same baqueteo, but it's at a faster tempo. So I'm going to do the clave first so you hear where it is, and you can clap along or tap along. If you have a set of claves or sticks, you can tap the clave out with that. It's in 2/3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Danzonete. So that's a little bit of a fragment of Aniceto Diaz's Danzonete. Then discussion when we get into part 2 of the basics of the danzón, and we're going to get into the cha-cha-cha and also how to play the bolero. But let me conclude by giving you 2 examples of repiques, fills that a timbale player would do in an improvisational context. When we're talking about the repiques, they're not solos, it's talking. Remember, we inherited all of this rhythmic vocabulary and redefined it into the music that we do today in various ways. And the main thing that we inherited is being able to speak, hablar en el tambor, no matter what context it is, whether it's the danzón from Cuba, whether it's the bombasica from Puerto Rico, whether it's the merengue from the Dominican Republic, etc., just to give you 3 examples of African rhythmic-based music that we do in the diaspora. Okay? So, the first repique I'm going to do for you is on the 2 sides of the clave. Okay? A basic repique on the 2 sides. Listen to how it sounds. I'm going to use the rim of the drum. And to get the sound, I hit between the last 1/3 of the stick to here. Okay? Clave wise, it'll sound like this in 2/3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Let's hear how it sounds in context with the paqueteo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. Slow. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. So I didn't play anything everything there so you can hear the 3 side of the clave all by itself. Now, the next one is on the 3 side of the clave. Okay? Here's what it sounds like in context. Starting in 3, starting in 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. I did a little roll there, un redoble, okay? The roll in drumming terms, if we use the vocabulary of the snare drum, is a 5-stroke roll. Slow. Okay. Right, left, right. And then fast, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. If you've never done rolls at all ever, one thing you can do is take a pillow, take your sticks, and just practice this. Right, right, left, left. Right, right, left, left. Mama, daddy, mama. Just do that. You can do that watching the Twilight Zone, Family Guy, whatever. Just keep doing that, so that you develop the technique of doing what we call doubles, 2 in each hand. All right? So, let's hear this in context. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. One time I did it with one hand, you can do it that way as well. Okay, now let's do it together with the relleno, repique, the filling in of the 2 side, really slow. And what happens when you put them both together? You have una conversación, a conversation. The drum is talking. Okay? And 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. Again, back to the basic rhythm of the baqueteo. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that time, I added that 5-stroke roll, those 5 strokes, as another fill-in in there to adorn, ornament, okay? And this is what we do as timbaleros in this style of music. It's a very beautiful style. It's the first style that you must learn on the timbales to be a well-versed timbalero. D-I-E-Z, okay? All right, so now let's look at another technique for the danzón. Instead of me doing this, doing the rellenos with the tips of my fingers, if you're playing in a big band context where the band is more powerful and you're doing like a danzonete, or this rhythm can also be used to interpret a song, this rhythm. If the band leader tells you, hey, we're going to do a classic Cuban tune, Son de la Loma, but play the first half of the song, use the baqueteo of danzón. Okay? So, another technique that you could use in that kind of a context, instead of filling it with your fingers like this, is to strike the rim of the hembra, H-E-M-B-R-A, the large drum, la hembra, the female. Okay? So, I'm going to do the same thing at a faster tempo, and I'll start off with the tips of my fingers, but then to give you contrast, and so you can hear what it sounds like, switch to the rim. All right? Let me do it slow first, so you can, as we say in jazz, cop it, get it, and then I'll do it faster. All right? In 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now using the rhythm. In 3, 2. Fast in 3, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. The rim. Now in 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Repique there, fill, okay, as a timbalero would do in a live situation. Okay, so this rim in Spanish is known as aro, okay, the rim. You might see if you have a chart, say in a more formalized band that has a maybe sophisticated arrangement, it might be very specific. It'll say baqueteo con el aro, which means do the baqueteo, but click with the left hand on the rim, okay? It's the same thing that I'm doing like this, except I'm using the rim. Okay, now to give
The son originated in eastern Cuba in the first decades of the century, related to similar Orient genres like changue and nengen. From the start it represented a mixture of Spanish-derived and Afro-Cuban elements. In the early son, the European features were somewhat more prominent, as is reflected in the predominance of string instruments, guitars and the guitar-like trace, the rather moderate tempo, and a song-like first section, the largo, that had an extended harmonic progression and narrative verses often sung in suave bel canto style. When the son took root in Havana, it incorporated pronounced Afro-Cuban features from rumba, notably the clave pattern and the extended montano section, following the largo, in which vocal call and response patterns were sung over a simple harmonic ostinato. These supplemented the use of Afro-Cuban bongo drums and the marimbula, a bass instrument derived from African thumb pianos, like the bira. Further, the repeated riffs, guajios, played on the trace-echoed patterns played on the bira in Africa. Finally, most soneros themselves were black or mulatto, and their song texts were rooted in Afro-Cuban street life and slang. By 1920, the son had become popular in Havana, where most ensembles added a trumpet and replaced the marimbula with a stand-up bass, making the standard format a septet. Recordings by the Sexteto Habanero and Ignacio Pinero's Septeto Nacional became popular throughout the island and outside Cuba, where their music was often confusingly labeled rumba. The son managed to achieve commercial appeal without losing its barrio flavor, reflected in its song texts dealing, like rumba lyrics, with all manner of topics, from romance to neighborhood events. A spin-off of the son was the Guajira or Guajira son, which, as flourishing from the 1930s, fused a medium-tempo son rhythm with guitar-based backing and lyrics that praised the beauty of the Cuban countryside and the simple, happy life of the Cuban peasant, as imagined and romanticized by urban songwriters. In that sense, many early guajiras represented a kind of fake country music, sort of like North American commercial cowboy music. But, as with cowboy music, rural people grew quite fond of these songs, which thus acquired their own sort of authenticity. The most famous guajira is Guantanamera, which uses a patriotic text by Cuban nationalist José Martí.
Cuba ha producido 25 géneros musicales, pero quizás el que mejor expresa lo cubano es el son, porque en el son confluyen toda una serie de músicas de origen hispánico, africano, caribeño, y cuando nace el son, alrededor de 1850, 1860, en la zona oriental de Cuba, en Baracoa, Guantánamo, Santiago de Cuba. Ese son tiene en sí los elementos musicales que definen la posterior música cubana.
Maní, si te quieres por el pico divertir, come un cucuruchito de maní. Cuando la calle sola está, será de mi corazón. El manicero entona su pregón y si la niña escucha su cantar, llama desde su balcón. Llegó el maní, llegó el maní, llegó el maní, llegó el maní. Cuando la calle sola está, será de mi corazón. El manicero entona su pregón y si la niña escucha su cantar, llama desde su balcón. Ya llegó el manicero, ya llegó. Ya llegó el manicero,
when the
As the music and rhythms of Cuba were moving north across the Florida Straits, the sounds and instrumentation of jazz were moving south. 7 musicians, a septeto, traditionally performed so. But Arsenio Rodriguez changed that. His instrumental innovations marked the birth of a new type of ensemble, the conjunto, and laid the musical brickwork upon which salsa genres later developed in New York City. He added a second trumpet and a piano. Rodriguez also included a conga drum.
That was the last instrument that got added to the dance bands and also the Latin jazz groups. That really didn't happen until the 1940s. He may not have been the first person to bring the conga drums into a dance band, but he certainly was one of the first, especially in New York, to be using a conga drum in it.
The sexteto was developed in the genre of the Cuban son. The instrumentation consisted of guitar, trace, contrabass, or marimbula in the style of changue, bongo, maracas, and claves. Among the important groups to develop this genre in the early 20th century are such groups as the Sexteto Habanero, founded in 1920, the first group to introduce the 6-piece instrumentation. Septeto, perhaps the most important Cuban son group, was the Septeto Nacional. Beginning as a sextet, they later added the trumpet in 1927, thus creating the septeto instrumentation. Conjunto. This instrumentation was developed around 1940, and was derived from the earlier septeto ensemble. The conjunto generally consisted of the septeto instrumentation, with the addition of 2 or 3 trumpets, 3 vocalists. The subsequent evolution of the son was marked by increasing sophistication featuring, on the one hand, the inclusion of more complex, jazz-influenced harmonies and European instruments, horns and piano, and, on the other hand, the gradual adoption of faster tempos and a more percussive, rhythmic sound. In that sense, the mature son was as much an heir to the proletarian rumba as to the suave and genteel danzón. The most dramatic change came in the 1940s, especially in the music of the Conjunto Casino and of bandleader Arsenio Rodriguez, an Afro-Cuban trace player, composer, and arranger. Arsenio, who had lost his sight in childhood after being kicked by a horse, became the most influential bandleader of the decade. In Cuba, however, he was largely shut out of the white-dominated ballrooms and, like other black performers in Cuba's virtual apartheid system, his band was relegated to lower-class and often dangerous black clubs. Unlike in 1832, white musicians now occupied the good jobs. Although blind, he could certainly learn from such discrimination what it meant to be black, and many of his songs defiantly asserted the pride he took in his Afro-Cuban heritage, some of which was allegedly transmitted to him by his grandfather, who was born in Calabar. Arsenio's direct contact with his African ancestry gave him both a sense of the continuity of his African ancestry and an acute awareness of the cultural rupture slavery had wrought. As he sang, "I was born of Africa, maybe I'm from the Congo, or maybe from Mpanga. I'm not a Rodriguez, I'm not a Fernandez. Maybe I'm an Emoto, maybe I'm a Mamamba." Together with the Conjunto Casino, Arsenio popularized an enlarged son ensemble, adding a conga, a piano, and second or third trumpets, a format called conjunto. Most important, all the instruments were to play regulated parts. The horn players played precomposed sectional arrangements while the rhythm section, piano, bass, and percussion, played standardized accompaniment patterns strictly, if subtly, aligned with the clave pattern. This modernized son gave up some of the informal, collective looseness of the traditional son. But it provided a tight, composite rhythm that had a unique drive and an electrifying appeal to dancers.
Yes.
The bedrock of African-Cuban music was transformed by Arsenio Rodriguez, a master of the Cuban mandolin known as the tres. Arsenio took the Cuban folk tradition called el son and created an original, bigger sound.
Arsenio Rodriguez, here's a man born in the Congo who was kicked in the head by a mule when he was 8 years old and blinded. Before Arsenio, all there was sextetos and septetos. There was no formal orchestra. They were charangas, but there was no orchestra or conjuntos. So what Arsenio did, the first thing he did is he added the conga drums to the orchestra. Can you imagine a Latin orchestra without a tumbadora, without a conga drum? I mean, it's practically unimaginable to me. Well, he was the first one to add a conga drum to the septetos. After that, he added a piano. There were no pianos in the bands, so they were just little guitars and one trumpet. Then he added 2 trumpets, then 3 trumpets, and then written arrangements for the trumpets.
Arsenio's new sound established an intimacy between the musicians and the dancers, a dynamic that inspired the mambo.
He was the first.
As I've said before, nothing is born in a vacuum. The root of it is the danzón de nuevo ritmo that was developed in the 1930s, in the mid-1930s, or actually the mid to late 1930s, by a great group called Antonio Arcaño y sus Maravillas. And Antonio Arcaño, great flute player. You're seeing him right now on the screen. Okay, he had in his Charanga orchestra the great Israel Cachao Lopez, who you're seeing right now on the screen. The genius, the man who modernized the Cuban bass and the repetitive patterns that are played by the bass called timbales. Now, up until then, the style of music known as danzón, which is very elegant and it has this basic cadence to it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That basic syncopated cadence that's very elegant, majestic, as we talked about before in the previous percussion discussion when I talked about the danzón, showed you how to play it on the timbales. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet. It's in the archives on the FB page that we have at the BMHC. In any case, that music up until then was all what we call through composed. There was no improvisation. It was all written out like classical music. But Israel Cachao Lopez knew that Antonio Arcaño, the flute player, the leader of Antonio Arcaño y sus Maravillas, was a great improviser, and he also was inspired by the great Arsenio Rodriguez, who you're seeing on the screen right now. Arsenio Rodriguez developed what was known as the son montuno, a modernization of the son, the Cuban folk song tradition for Eastern Cuba. What's special about the son montuno? Well, first of all, what did Arsenio do? Well, he played the Cuban mandolin known as the tres. He was from Matanzas, Cuba. Without him, we don't have salsa today. In any case, he modernized the song, this folk song tradition. Before Arsenio, you just had a guitar, and the tres, the instrument Arsenio played, the mandolin instrument of Cuba, 3 sets of double strings. And bongo, vocals, lead singer sonero or sonera if it's a woman, playing maracas and or guiro. Playing claves, and then the segunda voice, the second voice, would play the maracas. So the first voice, the sonero or sonera if it's a woman, would play the claves, the sticks, tapping out that rhythm that you heard me tapping out before. And then the segunda voice would harmonize and play maracas and or guiro. Well, and one lone trumpet, playing ad libitum. And it was all nothing written down, it was all ad lib. And a bongo, as I said before. Well, Arsenio does 3 important things. He adds the conga to this type of group. Can you imagine salsa today without a conga drum? Okay. Then he replaces the guitar eventually with the piano Lili Martinez, who you're going to see on the screen right now. Lili, okay, you can consider him the first salsa piano player. Every piano player that plays today in Cuban-based music, or what we call salsa today, his or her roots go back to the great Lili Martinez, who was from Santiago, Cuba. He knew the song real well because he was born and raised in the eastern part of Cuba where the song was born. Okay, and the third thing Arsenio does is he adds multiple trumpets. He replaces the concept of just one trumpet, now with 2 trumpets, 3 trumpets, sometimes 4 trumpets, all playing interlocking lines, mambo, horn lines, all intersecting at the clave. Let me give you an example. Mambo, 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 que rico y a mi mambo, mambo. Mambo, 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 que mambo, 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 mambo. Now imagine all that happening at the same time, and on top of that, somebody is soloing. Wow, fantastic, right? Now, where would they solo? They would solo in what the section of the song, after the song is sung, a section called the montuno, or el montuno in Spanish. And what does it mean? Well, the word montuno comes from the Spanish word montura, the saddle of a horse. So you're riding on a saddle of chords. It could be just one chord, it could be 2 chords, 3 chords, 4 chords, repeating over and over again. And then you have a coro, background vocals, and repeating over and over again. And then the sonero or sonera improvising, right, with their voice in rhythmic poetry in clave, or one of the musicians soloing. So it's very important that you remember that word if you've never heard it before. Montuno. That's the get down part, as hip hoppers would say in the music. The get down is where the drums and bass and everything are churning along, and everybody's getting down and busy with the music, dancing. Well, in Cuban-based music, the montuno is where we get down. Okay, but up bass music, the montuno is where we get down. Okay, but up until then, in charanga orchestras playing the elegant danzón, this elegant rhythm that I played for you before, it's slow and elegant. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There was no improvisation because it was all through composed. But in Antonio Arcaño's band is Israel Cachao Lopez, the great bass player who you're seeing on the screen right now. In any case, he goes to Antonio Arcaño and he tells him, hey, check out what Arsenio is doing with his group. The great tres player, Arsenio Rodriguez, who's modernized the song with his creation, the son montuno. They're really improvising, getting down and everything, and we just play these elegant dance songs. We don't get to improvise or anything like that. So, and one of the reasons they got to see that group, Arsenio Rodriguez's conjunto, and a conjunto is just a Cuban group with bass, piano, very important, congas. Arsenio adds the conga drum. He's the first to really add the conga to and make it a permanent part of a band. He adds the piano, kind of replacing the guitar with the piano. Lili Martinez being his first piano player. And Lili knew the song tradition from Eastern Cuba very well, so he could apply all that to the piano. Arsenio's on the tres, the mandolin instrument of Cuba, that he was a virtuoso of, 3 sets of double strings. And then you have the sonero, who plays the clave and sings the lead, or sonera if it's a woman. Segunda voz, who does the harmonies, plays maraca and or guiro. And 1 ad libitum trumpet. Arsenio adds the piano, he adds the conga, and instead of just 1 trumpet playing ad libitum, he adds multiple trumpets, all doing horn lines, all at the same time, as I talked about before. So, okay, those are the 3 innovations that Arsenio does. They had the same manager, Arsenio Rodriguez's conjunto, his group, okay, and Antonio Arcaño and his Maravillas. They both had the same manager, so they would be booked at the same time at gigs a lot of times. And so that influences Cachao. He freaks out and he goes to approaches Antonio Arcaño and tells him, hey, we got to do the same thing. So before then, the Charanga orchestras, they just had the guiro, this instrument. It's the scraping instrument, the guiro macho, and the timbales. What happens? They decide to add a conga drum. So Antonio Arcaño's Maravillas is the first Charanga orchestra to add a conga drum to their rhythmic complex. Remember, in a conjunto like Arsenio's, you have the conga drum, the bass, the piano, the tres, and you have also the bongo. Okay, that's the percussion and rhythm section. But in Charanga, there's no bongo. You just have timbales, guiro, and the conga, as developed by Antonio Arcaño y sus Maravillas.
By 1939, with the addition of a conga drum to the Charanga ensemble, the Afro-Cuban structure of the mambo had solidified. The conga was borrowed from the conjunto ensemble, brass, trace, and percussion, led by Arsenio Rodriguez, who had created the modern Afro-Cuban sound for the conjunto by layering ostinato patterns and building elaborate arrangements around the clave, the backbone of Cuban dance music. Arcaño and the Lopez brothers transformed the Charanga orchestra in a similar way. In the final mambo section, Cachao's bass interlocks with the conga's tumbeo or ostinato as anchor, over which the violins played their repeated guajios. On top were the florios or improvisations of Arcaño's flute. Another innovation was the cowbell added to the timbales set, now a standard feature in Latin music. By the early 40s, the flowing rhythm and syncopations of the new sound were a tremendo hit with dancers. The Arcaño band had energized the Charanga sound and reunited the danzón with the dancing public.
De ahí surgió el danzón de ritmo nuevo. ¿Por qué se llamó ritmo nuevo? Porque era nuevo. Le dieron el nombre de lo que era, ¿no? Claro. Eran danzones, pero ya no era el danzón de Failde, no era el danzón tradicional, era un danzón influido por el jazz, por la música norteamericana y por la armonía norteamericana y por un concepto orquestal rítmico novedoso que lo hacían Israel López Cachao, Orestes López, su hermano, Jorrín, un poquito después, Félix Reina, Antonio Sánchez, musiquita.
Cachao and his brother Orestes were innovators of Cuban music for over 2 decades. They transformed the danzón with their introduction of the mambo in the late 1930s.
El danzón que quisimos crear, que ahí sale el mambo, porque primero sale el mambo, se hace, pero por la velocidad que llevaba en una época de romanticismo, la gente bailaba muy despacio. Y entonces no era posible bailar en ello. Y por poco nos quedamos sin comer porque si no se baila no se come. Y entonces pues decidimos reducir la velocidad a mambo danzón. Entonces ya la gente aceptó a bailar.
Siempre en su casa presente está el bodeguero y el cha-cha-cha. Vete a la esquina y lo verás, que atento siempre te servirá. Anda enseguida, corre de allá, que con la plata lo encontrarás del otro lado del mostrador, muy complaciente y servidor.
Arcano, who shared bills with Arsenio constantly, saw what a difference Kike Rodriguez conga made in Arsenio's band. In 1943 Arcano hired Kike to teach his band boy how to play conga, and before long Arcano had integrated a conga into his radiophonica, bringing the total number of musicians to 17. This new instrument gave the strings more support, and freed up Arcano's timbalero. Thus was born the ritmo nuevo, new rhythm, the big beat approach to charanga. When the danzón arrived at the mambo CC tie-in, the conga locked down the rhythm while the timbalero began slamming out a 1-2-3-4 on a cowbell mounted on his drums, a smaller cowbell than the one Arsenio's bongacero used, but then, this was a lighter music. On top of this, the flute blew more freely than before.
Danzón is a very elaborate, almost like a minuet in the way that it's danced. It was danced almost choreographically. People that danced it knew what they were doing. There was the language of the fan that the women used when they were dancing danzón. It's got some very specific steps that are done, and it's very formal, and it was considered like very high class and had a lot of etiquette that went along with it. So it was funny because he brought these really cool African rhythms to this music and created this that kind of became like the waltz of Cuba.
As a young man, he became a member of a lot of the most popular orchestras, predominantly the Arcaño y sus Maravillas.
Bueno, yo hice 1500 y mi hermano otros 1500 porque nos pusimos de acuerdo y producíamos danzones hasta 28 danzones en la semana. 14 él y 14 yo, así. Fue mucho. Un récord se puede decir que es. Ahora que yo me di cuenta, pues yo todos los días escribí. Y un día estoy escribiendo y yo fumaba cuando caí. Pongo el cigarro aquí. Bueno. Y una de las veces, cojo el lápiz, me lo pongo en la boca y que el cigarro me lo puse aquí. Y me quemé. A ver si me entiende lo cuento ese.
His memory is just a sharp.
Okay, that's the percussion and rhythm section. But in charanga, there's no bongo. You just have timbales, güiro, and the conga, as developed by Antonio Arcaño y sus Maravillas. Okay, so now what does Israel Cachao Lopez do? He starts composing songs so that the musicians can improvise. They start off playing the elegant danzón rhythm, and then they go to a montuno, the vamp section, montuno, M-O-N-T-U-N-O, where the musicians get to improvise. Remember, the word montuno comes from the word montura, which means the saddle of a horse. So they're riding on a saddle of cords so they can improvise, just like Arsenio Rodriguez was doing in his conjunto. But now they're doing it in the charanga orchestra. So to do that, they switch from this rhythm that I played before, the baqueteo, that march-like syncopated rhythm that I played before on the skin of the hembra, the large timbale, and Ulpiano Diaz, the timbalero, for Antonio Arcaño y sus Maravillas. He switches to a small bell mounted just like this, as you saw me doing before, like this. Now watch what I'm doing. The bell, I'm muffling it by putting my forefinger on top of the stick and slightly pressing. I don't want this. I want this. Go, 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 go. Okay? To get that nice dry dead sound. With my left hand, I'm doing what we call el sobado or el sobao. Okay? Comes from the word sobar, which means to rub in Spanish. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So I have the stick underneath my palm, holding it with my thumb. And I just muffled on beat 2. 1, 2. On beat 4, these 3 fingers close, open up my thumb, they hold the stick. This finger is pointing up, the pointing finger, the index finger, and I strike. My bottom of my palm remains on the rim of the drum, and I get the characteristic open note. Like the open note on a bass, or on a string, or the open note of a conga drum. Watch my hand again. I muffle on beat 2, and I strike on beat 4, like that. Okay, so it looks like my hand is forming like the shape of a pistol. Okay, again, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 1. A nice open tone. Okay, so this is what is played in Israel Cachau's new creation that he calls danzón de nuevo ritmo, danzón of new rhythm, or danzón mambo. And what Enrique Jorin does
around which everything has to fit. So that was great. Let's go from here, from the folkloric music. The next thing that we want to talk about is the danzón.
Danzón is a very distinctive style of music from Cuba that date from the end of the 19th century. And it is important because that's where the timbales came from. The timbale was invented to play danzón.
as another fill-in in there to adorn, ornament, okay? And this is what we do as timbaleros in this style of music. It's a very beautiful style. It's the first style that you must learn on the timbales to be a well-versed timbalero. And you know who was the master of it? The man who put the timbales and made it a solo instrument. The same thing that Gene Krupa did for the jazz drum set in jazz. Well, Tito Puente, native New Yorican, did the same thing for the timbales. And he learned how to play baqueteo from 2 Cubanos that lived in East Harlem, Spanish Harlem where he grew up, Carlos Montesino and Antonino Tony El Cojito Escoyes. How's that for some history? All right. My name is Bobby Sanabria, and you've been in tune with Percussion Discussion.